one district. And so far, because one person was running all the programs, he was treated more as a district-wide activity rather than individual school-by-school activity. We can do it that way. It just limits the flexibility of using the funds for one particular program that needs it this year versus another one that doesn't.
And I may be a little ahead of myself. What I'm preparing for is if we reach a point where we recognize the revenues through the sports fees exceed the cost of running the sports programs, then we may, which I understand we don't anticipate that, but if we found that out, then we would want to look and say, well, can we reduce, and if we're going to reduce a student sports or activities fee, would we do it at one school and not the other? That's when I would need that type of analysis. First, let's look at the balance between fees coming in and cost of running the sports program.
And we can do it by school. My suggestion would be, so as not to limit the flexibility of how the funds are used, to not create the two accounts, but we certainly can break out the expenses and the revenues by school and present that to the school committee.
But I think the first step, as you suggested, is let's look at the totals of this.
Yeah, and we can do it, and we can break it by school as well. Okay. That analysis can be done. I just would not suggest to actually create two accounts out of the one, but simply keep track of the money within the account.
That would help me. Thank you.
All right. Any other one of these that you would like to look at? Because the analysis takes a while. I know we did some of this earlier in the year with the fall program, but we good?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Colley. Item F, the draft fiscal year 12 budget discussion. Dr. Colley.
Okay. I am going to do a couple of caveats. I actually revised these two ways. The first way that this presentation was revised from what you got originally last, I believe it was Friday or Thursday, because we were not here Friday, was we were still in the dark as to what was going to be proposed out of Beacon Hill. We are, as of this afternoon, we have some preliminary numbers for Chapter 70 as of, I believe, I want to say Monday. Was it Monday? No, actually it was Friday, but I got it on Monday. Governor Patrick had made some statements that led us to believe that perhaps Chapter 70 would not be cut as deep as we had expected. Originally, when we were talking in the fall about the budget for next year, we were looking perhaps numbers were thrown around between 5 and 10% reduction of aid to localities. Now, that aid includes Chapter 70. So when we were trying to put together what's our first look at the budget, I was going to go with a 5 and a 10%. What would that difference look like? I am encouraged by what the governor has done, which he basically says he wants to keep Chapter 70 intact. He wants to level fund some of the other programs, perhaps increase a few of the programs like Circuit Breaker, which is SPED reimbursement. However, he proposes, and then the legislature is going to have to wrestle with it and decide whether they're going to keep it or not. My experience has been it may not be everything the governor wants, but at least it tends to be closer to that than not. So if looking at the preliminary numbers that have come out, keeping Chapter 70 either level or perhaps even bumped up a little bit, it may mean that even the updated numbers that I put into the PowerPoint that you're going to see tonight may not be as dire or as dim as I present them here. But again, I know the state has a deficit. How big is it going to be by the time spring rolls around and they finally decide this is our budget for next year as a state? How is that reflected back to Chapter 70 and the revenues that we depend on or that the town depends on? It's still fairly early. We should see the full HR 1 within the next couple of days or so. So with that, let's put it up there and run through some of the analysis for draft 1 for the budget. The other part here that was changed was we made some changes to the district improvement plan at last week's school committee meeting, so I've reflected them in here. Oops, too fast. The first thing that I wanted to point out, and I know people keep asking me, well, what happened last year? And last year, even though it seems like we have some new programs going, we have some new staff, the actual balance of how many new staff we were able to bring in versus how many staff we lost is up here. We lost about a little bit over 3 administrators in terms of full-time equivalents. That's because some people actually ended up working part-time. But we did reduce administrators. We also reduced the teaching staff, even though we did increase some SPED licensed staff, like the psychologists, speech, OT, and school adjustment counselors. And at the end of the day, as we went through this year, we've actually increased paraprofessionals and teacher assistants. For example, we just agreed to use the Jobs Fund, the grant. Instead of to get another teacher for the middle school, we decided to get 2 assistants. So when you look at the numbers, you see some increases in the paraprofessionals and assistants. So overall, we have reduced the budget in these areas to deal with this current year's budget. So right now, when people ask, have we increased class size? Yes. What happened to administrators? Were some of us doing more jobs or working at doing more responsibilities than we used to because some people are not in the game anymore. The other part was 2 years ago, the state decided to reduce some of the funding that came to us through grants. For example, special ed. We used to get more money through Title I. The high school had more money coming to them through grants, and so did preschool. But as those grants were reduced, the state actually said, we'll reduce the grants that you usually get year to year, but we will replace it with stimulus funding. Now, the federal government said when you take on stimulus funding grants, make sure that you try to keep half of it as an investment, meaning things that later on you won't have to replace. For example, we've used a lot of this money for staff development, so making our staff better able to teach and deal with students, whereas they also said